Genes just don't do things themselves. Genes get the ball rolling, and then there's interactions at the experiential level. And that experience is not just the broader social environment, which is critically important, of course, but even just building brains. We've only got 20,000 or so protein coding genes. And that's not nearly enough to produce the trillions of synaptic connections we have in our brains, say nothing of the rest of our bodies.
How did children invent humanity? What is the importance of childhood and that for us as humans?
Well, um, it's pretty uncontroversial that experiences during the early part of life shape the people we become as adults. And as a developmental psychologist, I've tended to focus on the preschool age, school age kids. But of course, you can go back to prenatal development as well. And so the role of childhood and early experience on adulthood is pretty standard stuff for developmental psychologists. But I take an evolutionary perspective as well. And one of the ways of looking at childhood from an evolutionary perspective is how is it that our evolutionary past, the way our forechildren adapted to the environment so they could survive and thrive, how did that affect current children today in terms of adaptations, helping us to understand how we became the adults that we've become. And so that's what most of my work in theorizing in evolutionary developmental psychology has been about. But there's another way of looking at the role of evolution and development, or ontogeny, development of the individual, and phylogeny, development of the species. And that is asking, how did our ancestor development shape the course of evolution? And of course, the standard line in evolutionary theory is that natural selection, there are mutations, and natural selection sort of selects what works and what doesn't work. It's the creative force in development. But people from a developmental perspective, as myself, um, view development as actually the creative force in evolution. It is changes in our ancestors' early development that made the stuff, produce the stuff for which natural selection can operate. And understanding how, knowing that all our ancestors developed, and it was changes in development that really was the basis of evolution of not just the human species, pretty much any species, but I'm focused on
Hmm.
Homo sapiens.
Can I,
And so that's that side of the coin. So there's really two
hmm.
sides, I think, of the evolution and
Yeah.
development coin.
I wanted to just jump in there because to see if I understand what you're doing, which is that we obviously often think about the process of evolution as it's going to shape us, and part of us is our development, our childhood. So that's fine. But then it's interesting to think, given childhood and how we as an organism develop in a, a specific organism, ontogeny, as you say, then that actually is going to have an impact on evolution itself, the broader process, because I guess because that childhood and that development is so important and so that's actually going to shape how evolution works. So is that right?
That's right. The proposal is that this is how evolution of the species, our species in particular, occurred, and presumably that what will happen in the future as well. It's uh, humans in particular are highly plastic or pliable individuals, cognitively, behaviorally, and this is especially true in very early parts of development. And a young organism's response to environmental conditions, the plasticity, the degree to which it can modify its behavior, its brain, its neurons in response to the environment produces a different organism, a different animal, so to speak, with different interfaces with the local environment. And these are the pressures that natural selection works on, so to speak. This is the stuff that natural selection works on. And over the course of time, it's changes in development that have produced changes in the species that produce the adult of the species, of course, that continue to do the reproduction, but eventually produce us.
Right, right. And then how exactly is that childhood, that developmental process important for shaping evolution and us as a species and who we are today?
Well, I mean, I think it's critical. This is, for example, how how long is it that we show the prenatal rate of brain growth? And all primates, show a very rapid period of brain growth early on in prenatal development. Humans, this is extended after we're born. In part, this is necessitated by the fact that our skulls get too big to pass through a birth canal, so we have to much development of the brain in particular, thus has to be done postnatally. That would normally be done prenatally if you're a chimpanzee or an orangutan, for example. So what happened is, seemingly happened is, we were born early, but we've extended the prenatal rapid prenatal rate of brain growth. So a lot of brain development is going on at a time when this young organism is exposed to a very complex social and physical world, where if they kept the brain growth rate or the uh, the prenatal development period of a normal primate, they'd still be in the mother's womb, tucked away, nice and sound and warm, but they wouldn't be getting the types of experiences that they are. The fact that we are getting those types of experiences changes the infant brain, changes the trajectory that from this point on, their cognition and the social behavior develops.
Ah, I see. So in that example, if we're born before our brain fully develops, then that's actually gonna mean you're having now many different environmental factors. You're literally interacting with people, completely changing you and how your brain is developing. Whereas, in orangutan, it comes out and it's closer to fully formed. So
Uh,
okay.
yeah, that's on target. I think that's pretty accurate. Um, the
Yeah,
well,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting because in some of your books I've been reading about how uh we think that genes kind of they dictate everything and they're the most important thing, but in a way when we bring in things like environmental factors, like you kind of mentioned, play, if we were born before our brain fully develops, then those environmental factors shape who we are. But then on a sort of broader level, any any kind of interaction, whether it's even before we're born in our womb, hearing sounds, there is a general arc of development that any species of animal has. And so if they don't experience that arc, then even with the right genes, things can go wrong. Like, for example, there are many weird examples of, birds and their eggs and you change like the sound or manipulate them in some kind of unfair and mean ways, but and they change they change, who they relate to afterwards.
Yeah, one way of looking at it, or some way I like to phrase it, is that the reason that most people grow up to be like other people and most chimps like other chimps and most mosquitoes like other mosquitoes is that we inherit not only a species typical genome, a species typical set of genes, but also a species typical set of environments. And genes always get expressed in environments. And so context makes a huge difference. And when the context that you're developing in is similar to the context that our ancestors have had for eons, going back hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions in some case, you're going to get a species typical pattern of development. But when the patterns, when the experiences, the contexts are a little off base, a little different, uh, all bets are off. There's given the high level of plasticity of changeability, the organism, the developing organism, may change in unpredictable ways. And some of these ways will affect the expression of genes. These are sometimes called epigenetic effects, how experiences alter the sort of chemistry of individual cells, which then send out messages to activate or deactivate certain sets of genes, producing different levels of DNA, different levels of protein, for example, to stop building things. So genes are critically important, but genes just don't do things themselves. Genes get the ball rolling, and then there's interactions at the experiential level. And that experience is not just the broader social environment, which is critically important, of course, but even just building brains. We've only got 20,000 or so protein coding genes. And that's not nearly enough to produce the trillions of synaptic connections we have in our brains, say nothing of the rest of our bodies. Once the process gets started, it's experience, so to speak, how neurons are growing, how they're connecting with other neurons that then generate the next steps. And in a species typical environment, you're going to get a species typical organism. Enough variability to make things interesting, but you just can't say genes determine behavior, genes determine brains. They get the ball rolling, but then we have evolved to expect certain types of experiences, starting with brain development, but then you're going to the broader environment as well. You mentioned play. A characteristic of many social mammals is they play as young organisms, and this play, although it's supposed to be purposeless, actually plays a very important role in mainly their social interactions. Again, you see this mainly in social species. In humans, one phrase that you hear a lot, supposedly attributed to Montessori, play is the work of children. Well, in a sense, it is. It's what children do. And the play of children plays an important role in shaping their cognitive development, shaping their social development, preparing them for life in a social species. And we often lose track of things like play. We're saying, well, it's childish. Well, of course it's childish, but it's not it's a very necessary type of childlike behavior that to suppress it is and replace it with, for example, more academic learning or whatnot is missing the point. It's
Mm.
important in its own right for a whole host of reasons.
Yeah, I would love to get into why it's important, but one interesting thing is that on play we can call it childish, but there's some great cognitive science at the moment by people like John Vervaeke on the concept of serious play as a kind of way that even adults learn. We take up the way people act. I know even myself, maybe I'm still young, to almost because I was a child, I'm 22, so my brain is actually still developing, but
Mhm.
I'm constantly even taking other people's opinions as if it's my own, and I notice I'm like, oh wait, that's because I'm like seeing people that are sort of inspirational to me, and I'm like trying things on, and so I think these are kind of even crucial to maybe get that childlike plasticity even like all as we age, to because we can't just, like, as you say, you contrast play with academic study and things, and that's useful and helpful, but then I think you kind of have to, I think you learn a lot, like I know in, say, doing martial arts or other things, you have to kind of try things out. And that's another kind of skill set that I think play sort of helps sort of elucidate, and that's just kind of crucial to it.
Right. Well, play, at least some forms of play, are very creative. You don't have to stick with reality. You can pretend play, fantasy play, which characterizes humans, and maybe we're the only species that it does characterize. There's some debate about cetaceans, dolphins, and whatnot. But we, through through this creative play, this fantasy play, we create other worlds. We engage in counterfactual reasoning. You know, if you're a young child, you're playing house, you be the mummy, I'll be the daddy, and whatnot. Well, you're not really the mummy and I'm not really the daddy, but we've got to go into these roles and stick with them at the meantime. And we're thinking about things that are possible but not real. We're creating alternatives here. And this type of counterfactual thinking is really central to more advanced human cognition, human thought, not only in the social realm, but in the intellectual realm as well. And this type of play that uses imagination, that uses abstract thinking, um, some people think it was really played a critical role, a central role in human cognitive and social cognitive evolution.
When you talk about the importance of play for counterfactual development, and it makes me then think about things like theory of mind
Yep.
and Piaget, and the kind of ways in which humans have this maybe unique ability to be able to appreciate other people's perspective and see ourselves in a, kind of we space. We aren't just ourselves, and to think about what other people are thinking about. So what would you say to that, as it develops, and the importance of that?
Oh, I think it's clearly important. Um, One perspective you see among some psychologists is this whole idea of developing agency and understanding that I am an agent, that things I do make a difference. It's not just things I do that make a difference, but things I think make a difference. My behavior is based on what I want, my desires, and what I know, my knowledge. And this dictates to a large extent how we behave in the world. But if that's true about me, it's also got to be true about you, that your behavior is based on what you want and what you know. And it may not match exactly my wants and knowledge. And so this is where theory of mind comes in. We're operating as if I have and you have a theory of mind. We don't see it. We infer it. We're referring agency. You're doing things for a reason, and we try to infer what that reason is. We understand why we may be doing something, and we apply that to what others are doing. And these are exercised through play, again, through sociodramatic play, symbolic play. A lot of symbolic play can be done alone. You can pretend that the chair you're sitting in is a race car, and you're going around a racetrack. But most of this symbolic play, or much of it anyway, beginning at about the age of 3 or so, is done with usually other children, can be with adults as well, of course. And this exercises some of this counterfactual reasoning, putting yourself in other people's shoes, behaving in an as if type of situation. And this type of thinking is just essentially defines Homo sapiens in many respects.
Yeah, on that last point, I would like to contrast the human importance of childhood to other species, because I mean, one fascinating thing I've learned from reading your work is that even humans, they actually look more childlike, like compared to other chimpanzee, other, apes and things. They're like literally, and I look at my, like childlike, hairless face, and I'm like, oh yeah, we kind of do. So yeah, why humans? Why have we so almost uniquely almost taken childhood up as like an adaptive thing that we like prolonged?
Well, this is referred to as neoteny, sort of retention of juvenile features into later stages of development. And you see it across many phyla, many animal groups. So it's not just unique to humans, but humans have sort of taken real advantage of it, it seems, at least among the primates. And first of all, you mentioned the physical characteristics. If you look at the faces of baby orangutans, baby chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans, we look an awful lot alike. There's a lot of similarity there. But the faces of orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas grow out more, get the brow ridges, the big jaw. Humans, we stay sort of infantile-like, at least relative to our other species. And natural selection seems to have used this infantile characteristics, these infantile looks, which are so important in getting mothers in particular of a lot of species to identify, oh, this is a baby, this person, this individual needs my love and attention. Well, humans use this to a great extreme. Baby faces are adorable, and they foster attention and caregiving in adults, particularly parents. But there's another side of this, and it's on the side of behavior. So a lot of human behavior, some aspects of it, some people have thought of being as neotenous. You see this neoteny in domesticated animals. So we have intentionally domesticated animals to be domesticated. What does that mean? We have selected animals for docility, for non-aggressiveness, at least towards humans, and we breed the most docile male or the most docile female, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually, after many generations, we get dogs instead of wolves. But accompanying these dogs, this docility of behavior, is the appearance, the facial appearance of most dogs is much more neotenous, infant-like compared to wolves. Okay, so that's an interesting fact, but what some people have suggested is that humans are a self-domesticated species, that we have retained some of our juvenile characteristics, for example, tolerance of others, that we are less reactively aggressive towards one another. And this more infantile behavior, if you would say, this lack of reactive aggression, allowed us to get together to cooperate with one another without getting in each other's way. Take, for example, the idea that if you put 200 people on a plane together and we fly across country for 6 hours, for the most part, we're going to get there without having lots of fistfights and people getting injured. If you put 100, 200 chimpanzees on a plane together and flew them in this confined area across country, there's an awful lot of probably dead chimps and injured chimps. They are highly reactive aggressively. We can inhibit that, which many people have interpreted as a neotenous, more childlike behavior, which permitted us to become more social, to evolve and develop more better social cognition, to better cooperate and compete with one another. So this self-domestication idea ends up being, we're able to achieve it because we retain not just infantile physical characteristics, but some juvenile behavioral characteristics as well.
This is fascinating, just making me think differently about our global kind of civilization today and how it's in part then it seems like a kind of continuation of us being childlike. Can we promote the, because I guess when we're younger we play, we need to learn from others and cooperate, and then you think about though like other and us, but other species of apes fighting a lot and wars, but we're like, well, can we try and get that under control? And like we still have some, but to the best, it seems that we're the best at reducing that. But then in part that might be because we're the most childlike, and it makes me even think. Yeah, go on.
You know, that's part of the point. But the other part of the point, we're not all that docile necessarily. Richard Wrangham has promoted this idea that while we have become less aggressive, our level of sort of cognitive aggression, intentional aggression can be quite high. So we can be very aggressive towards one another, but it's very thoughtful. I'm thinking about how am I going to raid your camp and steal your food and your goodies. Or there's someone in the group who isn't very cooperative at all, who's causing trouble. We can get together as a group and ostracize or even execute this person. So we haven't lost our aggression. What we've done is we've reduced our reactive aggression, which enables us to cooperate. But some of that cooperation can be used in very planful aggression against other members of the species, other groups, if you will. So it's a double-edged sword here. Our neoteny, if you will, our self-domestication has permitted us to become less reactively aggressive so we can cooperate with one another more successfully, while at the same time our increased cognitive abilities, intellectual abilities have allowed us to plan, oftentimes to act aggressively towards one another in a very planful, deliberate way.
Mm. I've I've heard from some people that it might be helpful to think about our modern society as actually in a way feminized, in the sense that women they like to exclude people rather than like directly like fighting people, and you can kind of see that with like cancel culture and things. And then
Mhm.
but then women are also more neotenous than men. So I don't know if there's like a relation here. There's that they kind of two come together.
Well, I think there's some connection there. Modern culture and the, so-called weird cultures, Western, educated, industrial, rich, developed, the kind of cultures we see in the US and the UK, much of Europe, most of Europe, I guess. Um, we Aggression and violence is allowed only by the state. The state can determine whether it be through war or police, who can aggress towards whom. And the rest of us are not supposed to be very aggressive towards one another. And, you got, there are laws preventing this. So because that's not allowed, so to speak, what we see is an increased level of indirect aggression, which you see more in women than in men, and girls than in boys. So men are engaging in more indirect aggression, relational aggression, spreading rumors about people, ostracizing one another, you're not in my group, etc., than might have been the case in the past. So this is I guess you could think of this as a feminizing of, uh, I guess using it as aggressive behavior may be a little extreme, but
Mm,
of ways of controlling one another. We do it less so in a traditional masculine way by physical attacks, and more so by indirect means, by spreading gossip and trying to damage relationships. So I think that's probably an
yeah,
accurate way of looking at it.
interesting. I and I guess to like keep thinking about a modern world today, I'm kind of interested in how, I mean, I know, so one thing is that often younger people, like we look at like statistics like drug use and like sex and things that they're lower, and it's almost like people seem like they're like people, often tell them, grow up, people not growing up enough. Like I'm looking at like falling fertility levels and also like falling employment amongst people that are younger. And I'm wondering like how the importance of childhood plays into that. I mean, one thing I think about often is how we can tell people to like grow up faster and people aren't growing up fast enough. But I sometimes wonder if the opposite is true, in that sometimes I think about like talking to like people in school at the moment and the amount of work they're given, and like if we give them more work, they'll become more mature. But I sometimes think maybe it would be better if there's a way in which we need to like prolong the ability to play and explore, and I guess that might synergize with your work, but I don't know how you'd react to that in a way sometimes we might be almost growing up too fast. uh, uh, uh,
No, I've made almost the exact arguments in the past. It gets complicated, though. There are needs of society uh, that require sort of growing up fast, require a lot, knowing how to read and do be numerate at a relatively young age. You don't want to delay too long on that, even if that you might think it would be better off in terms of eventual adult attainment to do so. Um, but So yes, I think modern schooling is almost the opposite of playfulness. And our ancestors, and still many children today, learn best is seemingly from uh, more playful observational learning with one another, being highly motivated to work on some topics versus others. And so there's a balance. You just can't set the kids free and say, learn at your own rate, whatever you want, child. The needs of modern culture require formal education, but that formal education doesn't have to be drudgery, doesn't have uh, to beat the play and creativity out of children. Doesn't need to focus on things that are not relevant to children's lives. And so you have programs like Montessori that is still quite structured itself, but takes advantage of uh, inherent interests and inherent motivations. So modern education is necessary. A lot of the skills that we need have to be taught, or at least have to be presented in a structured way so children can acquire them. But this doesn't necessarily mean that you sit down 5 and 6 year olds with worksheets and have them bubble in answers and memorize things by rote. Um, there I think modern culture needs a revision of its educational thinking to take into consideration more what the natural way of learning through observation, through motivated learning, through working with people of different ages, often children of different ages, older peers, younger peers, acquiring the skills in a social or work context. So but it's easy for me as a critic to do this. It's tougher to do it
Right.
as a real reformer to come up with real creative curricula. But I think programs like Montessori are off doing things in the right direction. Um, but you you don't want to leave,
Yeah.
some kids will fall through the cracks. But having an evolutionarily informed idea of how children have evolved to learn and to acquire the skills and knowledge of a culture, I think can be very helpful in developing new curriculum
And on that
for
last,
modern.
yeah, yeah, and on that last point of education informed by our evolutionary past, I'm wondering what progress and development there's been in understanding how children exactly learn. Like you've done work on children's like learning strategies and
Mhm.
how, and I'm fascinated by, one question I had from reading your work is even what we mean by intelligence and general intelligence, given like to what degree can people apply and transfer skills from one domain to the next, and just what we mean by intelligence.
Oh boy, well, you're getting into you know, a different domain here to some extent, although our intelligence clearly evolved. We think of intelligence oftentimes as school smarts. Or if not directly school smarts, using the type of thinking that would have been good in school, uh, and often is reflected on IQ tests. And these are smart people, and yes, indeed they are. But the real way to think about intelligence, I think, uh, is intelligently adapting to local environments. What does your environment require for you to be a successful member of that group? And in cultures like ours, a lot of the skills that are tapped by IQ tests are also tapped by educational attainment and formal education, and are used indeed in the workplace. But that's only a subset of them. There are a lot of people who have skills that are not necessarily best suited to getting a high score at an IQ test or becoming a class valedictorian, that nonetheless are highly valuable, that are very useful in solving problems. Some people who grow up in very unpredictable young environments do best with unpredictable adult environments. They're expecting that. You may not think of them as intelligent in a traditional sense, but dealing with these unpredictable, often harsh environments that they've experienced as children and that they're experiencing as adults, they do better than those of us who grew up in more advantageous environments and they get thrown into difficult environments later on. For example, certainly in traditional cultures, the hands-on skills of a hunter or a gatherer or someone uh, who builds tools, constructs tools. These are these are what make for intelligent individuals. So intelligence should really be viewed as how one adapts, how well one adapts to one's local environment. And yes, there are clearly individual differences in them, but modern schooling should try to take these things into consideration as well. What are the types of skills that the children in these neighborhoods, these areas are going to be needing? And can they generalize? Can you have some general problem solving skills that you can apply to a variety of domains, or is it necessary to be a specialist and focus?
It's interesting your point on thinking as well about how our environment and our early circumstances impact the way we solve problems later on in life. I've been doing a lot of thinking into personality types and how as well they can kind of be shaped by early childhood and then they have different fits later on and it's like can be hard to change that.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and I want one interesting area that's kind of relates is, you know, personality theory, some people have been thinking about how the reason why we all have kind of different traits is that we need like synergies between them. So we wouldn't all want to have the same exact personality traits, but there be synergies in dealing with say many different kinds of problems and collectively solving problems. And I wonder because you've talked about the sociality of humans and how we need to be social, and that's part of who we are. I'm just wondering what you think of social intelligence or the collective intelligence of humans and or just in general in evolution. So I'm thinking a lot about how like talking to someone recently about how in a way every kind of intelligence is collective. You think about like different regions of the brain even collaborating or all a bunch of cells. So is there anything to say about that kind of intelligence?
Well, humans are a hypersocial species. There are plenty of social species in the world, from antelopes to rhesus monkeys, dolphins, and whatnot. And humans, I think, we epitomize sociality. Ants and termites are the epitome of social invertebrates, I suppose. But we couple ours with a high level of intelligence, with longevity, with living in large, complex, varied social groups. Uh, to do this, you have to be able to cooperate. You have to be able to get along with one another. Part of this is a theory of mind you talked about, learning from one another, using what knowledge someone else has with your own, cooperating, collaborating together to get a job done. But to do that, to collaborate, you've got to be able to share the wealth as well, share the what you produce. And chimpanzees can cooperate with one another to achieve a goal, but they don't always share the spoils. By 3 years of age, most children do. They'll cooperate and they'll split the what they were working for pretty much evenly. Humans could not have existed as they have, as long as they have, or as well as we have, if we weren't a cooperative species. Humans, yes, we're an aggressive species, we're a selfish species, but we are all also a highly cooperative species. And this is the yin and yang, if you will, of human existence. Our cooperation is as much a part of what makes us humans as our self-interest and competitiveness. It's not one or the other. We're always balancing them. In some societies, you see more cooperativeness, some other societies more individualism, but you never see one without the existence of the other. And my opinion, the opinion of many evolutionary thinking scholars, the social brain hypothesis, we evolved to be the being we are because of our social evolution, and this cooperation, collaboration is central to this.
What do you think the kind of future areas of research here, or what kind of questions are still left unanswered, and that might be kind of the ones that have been most debated, and therefore maybe it's hard to make progress. But what are the things that we still need to kind of look at?
Well, there's the classic nature nurture issue. And I remember mentioning this in a faculty meeting one time about a topic for an honor seminar, and someone said, well, haven't we answered that already? What can we just put that to bed? And at one level, of course we can. And there's no serious scholar that thinks it's all genetics or all environment. Of course, it's an interaction. But that's the simple answer. The difficult answer is, how do they interact? And then how they interact will clearly determine what the consequences of any particular environmental event, a biologic event, will be, which can certainly influence the how we as a society, as educators, as physicians, interact with our with people, with children. So there's a lot to be done looking at the how nature and nurture interact, the whole nature of this interaction, and then a whole variety of levels. I mean, at one level, you're going to get to the epigenetic and looking at getting into molecular chemistry. At another level, you're going to be looking at sociocultural factors, how is growing up in a weird culture different from growing up in a more traditional culture? Uh, how, to what extent, growing up in a weird culture, for example, is there a mismatch between our evolved psychological characteristics and the requirements of modern culture, and how do we get around those to optimize well-being, psychological well-being? And then at maybe a lower level or a more practical, achievable level, we can take a look at, we've talked about education. How can we, uh, how can our understanding of how nature, nurture, and our evolutionary heritage have influenced us to the point that we can best educate individuals? You see some of these things coming in with social media, with the internet. Um, for example, there's a lot of research and a lot of different directions the effects of social media on children and adolescents are going. Um, is it detrimental? Does it facilitate? What does it do? And depending on how you ask the questions, you get different answers. Well, understanding that social media um, is almost a perfect stimulus for our evolved characteristics for young people. We're very much a social species. We're very much concerned when we're young that of social comparisons, and social media just hooks into this just almost perfectly. Uh, and that's a good thing at one hand, on the one hand, but the other hand, with the anonymity of it, we can get cyberbullying. We can get too much focusing on the online types of interactions, and we miss the face-to-face interactions. You don't really need an evolutionary theory to try to figure out how to best to work this, but I think it helps a lot if you do. It helps if you understand what the nature of our social being is and our social development. By nature, I'm talking about what are our evolved characteristics. How are they modified by early experiences, later experiences? And I think having an evolutionary perspective at this macro level, to what extent is it a mismatch versus a perfect match, almost too perfect a match, can really give us some insights and help us deal with both the problems and the benefits that these social media have uh, for mainly children, adolescents, and young adults probably.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I was kind of going to ask about that, what social media and stuff do. And like on one level, you can think about humans as being really adaptive and as well, like, we are communicating more in a way with people. So maybe that's even a good thing if we're social. But yeah, like as you say, these like kind of complicated interactive effects. And it does link to, you mentioned epigenetics and the way in which there are many different aspects beyond genes that help shape who we are. But even people like Michael Levin and work on the intelligence of like cells to move and almost solve problems even beyond their genes encoding for that, or some recent work on fetuses, and if there are many of them together as they grow, they help each other and they can send messages to each other to like resist chemicals, or that I don't know why I bring that up, but it just makes me think more about the kind of collective intelligence aspect of this. And then you're like, okay, we're connecting more to people today, but and it must be kind of, yeah, even like, or even for me, doing a podcast with loads of different people, and yeah, not just seeing them, but having, a deep conversation with so many people. What does that do? Who has had so many strange conversations on, evolutionary psychology to, philosophy and whatnot, so, yeah.
No, there's certainly a lot going on in the world. We are the days of the polymath are probably gone. No one can be a Leibniz anymore and essentially know everything there is to know in the scholarly world. And so we are dependent on others, other specialists to tell us things that would just take us to a whole career to have to learn. So we have become, even among scholars, uh, highly interconnected and dependent on others. And of course, social policymakers are even more so, because they're not scientists or scholars, but they want to use science and to and the best knowledge they have, about psychology, sociology, whatnot, in terms of making social policy, public policy. We have to depend on others. The internet is makes it complicated, especially with AI, because there are a lot of sort of fake news out there. And one of the things at the university level, and probably we should really be doing this more at the high school level as well, is doing a better job of training or educating critical thinking. Um, Everything out there is not going to be true. You want the best to get the best information you can, but you want to be able to evaluate it critically. Does this make sense? How can I use this? Is this coming from a reliable source? Is this trying to get me to buy more tea versus coffee or whatever? What's the motive behind it? Um, and these are things that I think in evolutionary theory and certainly a developmental theory, sets of theories can help us uh, provide insights to. It's you mentioned, the interconnected world. We are highly interconnected, where we need to be. We are able to maintain these interconnections because of how our evolved sociality. But the modern world is making it quite complex, quite often difficult.
Mm. This has been fascinating. Thank you, David. I don't really have anything more to ask, but anything more you want to say, and if you want to direct people somewhere to find more of your work or your books.
Oh, well, I thank you for the interview. Um, I don't have a big social media presence myself. I leave that for a younger generation, who has a little more time for it. I've got some, I think, generally accessible books available on Amazon and whatnot uh, that a general educated lay public may find interesting. I think the one you mentioned, How Children Invented Humanities, is one of my more recent ones that I think gives an overview of sort of my thinking on this and the important role that sort of evolutionary thinking has had on how we understand development and how we can uh, uh, make the most of it.
Mm.
So yes, and I think that sort of sums it up. There are a lot of places that people who are interested in topics like this can make a contribution. If for potential young scholars, your level of analysis makes a difference. I think there's a lot in, in economics that is relevant here, or that this kind of thinking is relevant for economics, and you go all the way down to gene environment, uh, epigenetic interactions. So there's a whole range of scholarly disciplines that really need to be considered, that we have to try to integrate with to get the big picture. So working with one another, looking at what people in other disciplines are doing, and thinking how we can apply them to real life, to real children, for example, make their lives better and make adults, the mental well-being of the adults they become better, I
Mm.
think are all good goals.
Very interesting, and something I thought a lot about too. Trying to make science more interdisciplinary, and combine and think about how everything interacts. So this has been great. Thank you. I'll link to your books in the description.